Hello, I'm Haleigh Fontenot, and I'm going to be voicing this video. Hello. I would first like to start with the story before I give my presentation. There was a student, she was learning to read. She was reading a letter, and she became sad. Then a teacher came up, she was deaf, she asked what was wrong. The girl was so sad and depressed. And the girl said, "My sister died." The teacher apologized and said she was sorry. The girl gave the letter to the teacher, and the teacher began to smile. She said, no, your sister's alive. She's excited. This word, it means to be happy and to be excited. It doesn't mean dead. And the deaf girl looked relieved. She had thought her sister was dead. Now she was excited, and she was not stressed out anymore. I want to explain a little bit the history of deaf education up until now. Deaf education, in the 1870s, the first school was established. It was the first deaf education school. Two men had established the school, and many children came. And the process continued, and you began to see deaf students graduate. They would go out in the community and get jobs. And other deaf schools started to be established in New York and in many other places. So it really was spreading. And deaf teachers, many of them were working at the schools. And there was a lot going on for the deaf people in the schools and the deaf community. Hearing people that were involved would sign just the same as the deaf people, and it was very clear. Communication was very fluid, and it wasn't a problem. So as time progressed, in 1880s, there was an idea of a conference in Milan where teachers and all sorts of education curriculum came to discuss deaf children, and they took a vote and decided to create a law determining which method was best. And they decided that it was the oral method. Now, America had not yet really accepted this idea. They were still using sign language. But later in 1910, America was finally influenced by the oral method, and you began to see changes. The oral method began showing up. And deaf people didn't really like it. It wasn't one of the better methods. And the number of deaf teachers and professors began to shrink. And as time went on, the percentage of deaf teachers shrunk. Before it was around 80%, it had gone all the way down, and now it's only about 10% overall. Today, the deaf have ASL. It's not, they don't have a written language, but it was decided, ASL was its own language, but it wasn't equivalent to English. People would use it like it was the same. People use sign language for communication because they couldn't hear. And that was the language they knew. It was my language. I would learn how to write English and then use ASL. And then you have culture, deaf culture. They have their own specific culture. And it's not written, it spreads, and it continues with sign language. There's a history of pressure where each written word has a label. And deaf were fine with that. And third, there are language problems. Communication. That to accept English or to pick apart deaf culture and ASL and trying to explain that. There's all these different parts, but I've decided I wasn't going to label myself. I'm hearing impaired. I'm not hearing impaired. I'm deaf. Communication, there's a lot of confusion, but communication is different. I've started to feel motivated and positive about myself. And attitude has changed. Also, individuals like myself, our group, our parents, educators, we look to these groups. Our parents, hearing parents with deaf children tend to first seek out physicians and medical attention. They're clueless about deafness. And maybe they want the oral method or a cochlear implant. That's how they want to be advised. And their attitude to deafness is that it's not normal. A deaf person would say, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with them. Maybe hearing parents with deaf children need to consider the culture, maybe be influenced and encouraged to use ASL, to include their children in deaf activities and deaf involvement. Maybe if parents would see and be encouraged, they might use ASL and incorporate that and learn more and more, and even hearing parents would start signing. And the same as their deaf and be more equivalent to their deaf children and deaf groups of people. Teachers. Remember my story before, how the percentage of deaf teachers had shrunk? That's just the surface. The chance to interact with deaf teachers is slim, to find those that are very skilled in sign language. And for deaf to be incorporated, and for more deaf educators like myself to be incorporated and encouraged to work with hearing teachers and exchange ideas and use sign language. As a deaf person, I'd like to say deaf educators can work. And we can use ASL, just tweak the process a little bit. Deaf culture, up to now, is when we're communicating with the hearing world, you use English and write back and forth, but you realize that the world is English, and it's surprising. Businesses and companies out there, deaf person has to understand English. They have to have knowledge of English. You have to be skilled. It's very important. And today, deaf people like myself, it's important to know, to have language skills, to be bilingual, learn more and more of both languages, to be skilled in both. Teachers, if you want to reach the goals and be skilled in both English and ASL, you need to encourage the skills of both languages. But how can you do that? More and more deaf people should be interacting with you and your students and be involved in the deaf community and go out and use the language and be involved, interact. More work, more homework, more programs for sign language programs, more understanding of the culture, deaf culture. So how can you learn English? How? Well, we have two ways. Well, there's ASL and there's vocabulary encouragement, descriptions. Children learn, they listen to stories, they read books. They may not understand, but that's fine. You encourage them, you motivate them to learn and to learn to love to read and like to read and really become fascinated. The words and the pictures intrigue them and draw them in, even though they're English, and that's how they can learn the language. If, for example, you never read to a student, you can't learn. I was never a good reader. I would read and read, and I would try to learn. But if you do that, your English skills will improve. They will become better. That skill of English ASL and deafness is very important. You need to know both languages. It's important. The world is a hearing world that uses English. This means that a person can go out into a world and make sense of it. The deaf world is small. I know I can go out, but I have to explain myself and I have to make changes. Lastly, I want to be free. I want to have these ideas, and we can change them. It's the foundation. This can include culture, your culture. Enjoy learning about different ideas. It's important that we can explain. If we don't have this identity about an understanding of the culture, if we don't teach it, then we don't want it to be forgotten. We need more people to learn about the deaf schools and about the country. We need more people to learn. 20% of all deaf children, 20% are in programs. Now look at this number. Where's the identity? Do you teach deaf children at the deaf school? You see this? We just need more. Too often, children go out in their hearing world and people are talking and moving their lips and they grow up and they don't understand that, or they grow up hearing and they meet a deaf person and they may have a negative attitude about it, about deafness and sign language, because they may not understand it. And they need to understand, become knowledgeable. And we need to teach this in the schools, and it will grow. We need programs. We need to transfer. People need to transfer. You can't communicate like that when you have problems there's a miscommunication. It's a two-way street, and people may become frustrated if you're not the same as them. I mean, if you prefer one thing, that's fine. But you should support the idea and teach it and incorporate it in your lessons. Deafness is fine. You should become a supporter of it.